Good afternoon, once again from the beaches in Byron Bay. Just finished my farmers market shopping at Mullumbimby, where I get most of my produce for the week from local organic growers, seasonal foods, minimally processed. And today I'm going to talk about quite a few things quickly because I've got a lot to do today. So what I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to talk about the relationship of infections in our sinuses and brain fog. I'm going to talk about new research on infrared light and cognitive function in Alzheimer's disease. And I'm going to talk about more research on vitamin D in the lungs and the microbiome of the lungs. And I'm going to talk about Bitcoin as introducing a renaissance in human history through engineered monetary energy, and compare that to the energy of sunlight, both of which you can't really see. And of course today, everything I talk about will be consistent with my two foundational principles. First one, that true health comes from living life in harmony with nature's laws, consistent with the Gaia theory, which states that all living organisms and their inorganic surroundings have evolved together as a single living system. Also consistent with a statement by neurophysicist Carl Friston that the anatomy of any living system must contain a model of the surroundings in which it is immersed, and inspired by the poem by J.R.R. Tolkien that renewed shall be the blade that was broken, and not all who wander are lost. And the second principle, of course, is that Bitcoin is money for the people, by the people, part of the peaceful revolution. So if you're interested about the lung microbiome and infections, if you're interested about sinuses causing brain fog, if you're interested about infrared light and its effect on cognitive function, keep watching. Hang on for the musical break. I'll be back in a second. Okay, the first study was about basically confirming that chronic sinusitis will give us brain fog. Now, brain fog is this kind of nondescript term for kind of, just like the brain isn't working quite as well as it used to be. It's hard to put your finger on exactly, but those of us who have had it know exactly what it is. And it's kind of always been an unknown part of these chronic infections. And what this new study showed was that the people who had chronic sinusitis, when they did MRIs of the brain was structurally normal, but when they did functional MRIs, looking not just at structural anatomy but at the function of the brain, they found that the frontoparietal lobes of the brain were inflamed and not functioning as well as they should. They still don't know why that is, but we do know that when the Mayo Clinic did a study on that sun's bright today. When the Mayo Clinic did a study on chronic sinusitis, they found that more than 90% of chronic sinusitis has chronic fungal infections involved. And of course, chronic fungal infections, most of the fungi release mycotoxins, which are biological poisons, which cause inflammation throughout the body. And of course, the fact that the sinus is in such close proximity to the brain, it would be not unreasonable to think that maybe these chronic fungal infections are causing some of the brain fog which accompanies sinusitis. Second study was about the lungs and the microbiome, and I spoke last week about how that Candida has been found in everybody's lungs now and is actually part of our lung microbiome. And what this study this week showed was that the healthier the microbiome of our lungs, the less likely we were to get viral infections of the lungs. And the interesting thing was that they found that when they did bronchoalveolar lavage, which is to basically wash out the bronchi, the tubes of the lungs, and have a look at what's in the tubes of the lung, they found that people actually had vitamin D within the bronchoalveolar lavage fluid, which also protected them against infections. Which goes along with, I've said in previous videos, that vitamin D is an autocoid. It's produced locally and has a powerful effect in small amounts where it acts locally, where it's produced. So almost certainly the vitamin D is not only in our bloodstream, but is also in the tubes of our lungs as well, protecting us from infections, where that vitamin D is used by the macrophages in our blood to tear viruses to bits and present the pieces of those viruses to our other white cells, our T helper cells, our B cells, to produce antibodies to those invading organisms. Okay, so what do we know? We know fungus and brain fog. We know vitamin D is an autocoid in the lungs, which is why you want to get out in the sun as often as you can. One, walking in the wilderness, because you've got microbes in the air which go to improving the microbiome of the lungs. And secondly, getting exposed to sunlight, because that sun, which is not on my skin at the moment, it's in my face, but will be when I've finished videoing, will almost certainly, once I take my shirt off, be producing vitamin D in my lungs as well, lining my airways, protecting them. And the last study I want to talk about was new research on Alzheimer's disease, which is also relevant to the sun, because what this study found was that if people with Alzheimer's disease put on special helmets which emitted infrared light 6 minutes twice a day, they had an improvement in cognitive function. And the theory was that the infrared light was being absorbed into the brain and stimulating the mitochondria to produce more ATP, which is what our brain uses as an energy source. And that goes along with my video from last week showing that the brain, Alzheimer's disease might be related, might be another form of diabetes, it's kind of diabetes type 3 of the brain, where the brain is unable to use sugar as a fuel source and therefore functions much better on healthy fats. So certainly it appears that having a diet high in healthy fats and getting exposed to infrared light is going to be a worthwhile thing to try and improve cognitive function in Alzheimer's disease. Well, you can buy infrared light lamps, but none of them are a replacement for the sun, because of course not only am I getting exposed to UV light today, which improves my vitamin D, I'm also getting exposed to UVA light, and I'm getting also increasing in my body, because sunlight is not just about vitamin D, it also increases serotonin, it increases dopamine, it increases melatonin, it increases endorphins, it stimulates T cells in my skin, and it increases brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which basically helps me grow new brain cells and new brain connections. So there's much more in sunlight than just vitamin D production. All right, let's finally talk about Bitcoin, because it is related in a way to what we've just been talking about, because Bitcoin is undoubtedly going to bring about a renaissance in human history. We're going to be talking about what's going on now in 5,000 years, just like we always talk about how, you know, gold has been a store of value for mankind for 5,000 years. Well, in 5,000 years time, they're going to be talking about, you know, 2020, 2021, when Bitcoin led the renaissance in providing a more equitable monetary system and store of value, because basically Bitcoin is engineered monetary energy in crypto space. And people say, well, I don't like having it because I can't hold it in my hand. I can hold gold and silver and dollars in my hand. Well, sure, you can't hold it, but it doesn't mean it's not there. Just because you can't see infrared light from the sun doesn't mean it's there, not there, improving our brain function. Just because you can't see UV light in the sun, it doesn't mean that it's not there, improving my vitamin D status. And just because we can't see other aspects of the sun doesn't mean it's not improving my brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So energy, as we know, never gets destroyed, it just gets changed forms, and the energy of the sunlight, even though I can't necessarily see it, is doing wonders to my body and my brain, and the engineered monetary energy of Bitcoin is leading a renaissance in human history. And in 5,000 years time, we're going to be looking back to see who was involved and who adopted this new monetary energy. All right, that's it from me and my hair flopping around in the breeze. Dr. Greg Emerson, see you next week. Namaste, peace and love.